welcome back to you all. It's our last session of this year's virtual privacy conference, and I'm glad you joined us again. I hope your breakout sessions have been going smoothly, and you have been taking a lot of new information and new context with you. So for our last session, I have Gary Davis here with me. He's the Director of Privacy and Law Enforcement Requests at Apple. And Gary joined Apple in 2013 already, where as part of the global team, he heads up the EMEIA group and helps to lead Apple's worldwide approach to privacy across all their products and services. Interestingly, previously, he served as Ireland's Deputy Data Protection Commissioner for 7 years, and as a civil servant, he worked in the Irish Prime Minister's offices also for 10 years, so quite a strong background there. Gary has agreed to give us insights on the Apple Privacy Initiative for their apps. So I'm very excited to have you here with me today, Gary, and that you agreed to introduce us to the new initiative and to the new feature, and I'll give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thank you very much for the invitation to talk to you all today and the opportunity to walk you through our nutrition labels initiative, which we announced at our Worldwide Developers Conference just this last June, and which I think is going to bring about some big changes in users' understanding of the data collected by apps, which I, in fact, believe in turn will have big impacts beyond apps, as fundamentally it will change how users consume privacy-related information. And this is something that we have all in the privacy community spoken about for many years as to how do we reach out to users in this way. Of course, for many years, Apple has provided the strongest operating system level controls to our users. And even just this year, we've made a number of further updates, such as in relation to photos, an ability to share approximate location with apps, and the new tracking control, which I'll briefly talk about later as part of my overall presentation on nutrition labels. I thought, though, that for today, it would be useful to dig a little bit deeper as to our thinking and internal processes behind the development of the nutrition labels to give a little bit of an insight. And we have devoted considerable time and resources to the initiative over the last few years. Of course, if this was an easy thing to do, there would already be great examples out there of apps and other entities that are collecting data, providing relevant and accessible privacy information to users. But we think this is actually going to bring us on quite considerably. Of course, like all features that we ship, we expect to make further enhancements and based on user feedback, privacy advocates, developers, and of course, regulator feedback. And forums such as this, which provide a great opportunity for us to listen to what developers and others think, and then to actually make some further changes. Of course, there could even be some further changes prior to it being live on the App Store. We had two goals for this project. Fundamentally, to inform customers about how their data is being used. That is the most important point. And secondly, by showing that data to users, we hope to further encourage privacy-friendly behavior from developers, something that we have invested heavily in over many years. As I've already indicated, while this may sound simple, getting it right is complex, and we wanted to approach this in as thoughtful a manner as possible. So, as we were working through this project, there were several considerations that were uppermost in our minds. First, it's very easy to have information overload and to thereby defeat the overall purpose. So we wanted to figure out what information is most relevant to users and prioritize that information over other information that may be less important. Second, we wanted to think through how we could make that information simple and understandable so that anybody could digest it, but avoid making it too simple so that it loses important nuances or could become misleading. Third, we wanted to make sure that it was information that helped users take further control of their privacy. Fourth, we wanted to ensure that our efforts continue to incentivize developers to improve their practices so that consumers are even more protected. And lastly, we wanted to think about how we can reliably and consistently collect this information at scale so that we can present this information to users for every single app on the App Store. And that is a lot of apps, as you know. So let's dig a little bit deeper and start with what are the key elements of the nutrition label that we should surface to users. And as we were discussing this project, we found that there were 3 types of data that came up over and over again in those discussions. Firstly, there is some data that is collected but isn't linked to a user. This refers to non-personal data that isn't linked to a particular person or device. Of course, we wish to do this in a way that did not encourage developers to incorrectly claim that data that could be linked to users was not or could not be. The goal here, in fact, was to positively incentivize developers to be fully transparent, but also to really consider whether data that they collected could in fact be done so in a manner that was more privacy friendly by not collecting it in a way that was linked to users. For instance, could the same purposes be achieved with data not linked to users? We expect that developers and their users will be increasingly asking these questions. Second, there's clearly data that is linked to users and could be used to build up a profile about them for advertising purposes, or just simply to provide the service or feature sought by the users themselves. And third, there is data that is used to track users. This bucket refers to data that is either shared across companies or developers and used for targeted advertising purposes, or sold or passed to third parties such as data brokers. Clearly, this is one of the most high interest pieces of information that users might want to know when considering whether to download and use an app. We also thought that it was important to surface other purposes for why the data was collected. For example, was the data used for third-party advertising, the developer's own advertising, analytics, personalization purposes, just to deliver the app through the app's functionality, or something else entirely that the developer could call out to the user? And lastly, we wanted developers to be specific about what data types are being collected and used. This is important for consistency purposes so that users can easily recognize different data collection practices across developers. So we built up a list of 32 data types that are commonly collected from apps that can be surfaced in the App Store. And I might just go through them at a high level to be somewhat helpful. Clearly, contact information that can be divided into name, email address, data of that type. Health and fitness data, which is increasingly of interest to users. Financial information, various different categories. Location data continues to be something that we're very focused on in terms of increasing transparency and control for our users, so we wanted to call it out. Sensitive information such as race, religion, etc. People's contacts, user content, so content that the user specifically provides to the app. Their browsing history on the app or their search history. Identifiers, which is a broad category but intended to be such. Purchase information, usage data, including advertising data, diagnostics data in terms of making sure that the app is running, and then a broad category of other data types that were not covered that the developer can take the opportunity to explain perhaps in their privacy policy to users. In terms of collecting the data, we wanted obviously to create an easy way for developers to tell users what data they collect. This is obviously a crucial aspect when you're operating at scale. There's little point trying to put in place a framework for presenting this information to users if we did not make it straightforward and easy for developers to enter the relevant information. So what we did was create a questionnaire in a developer portal. So this is the internal view of what a developer sees when they log into Apple systems, where they could then tell us what data they collect so that we could then present that to their users in the App Store. This process walks the developer through the data types and categories, which I highlighted on the previous slide. So you can see here that the developer is being asked to tick the categories of data which they are collected according to the high-level categories that I walked through on the previous slides. And then they have an opportunity to change it, save it. It's all completely in their control. We also, of course, wanted to allow developers to be very clear about the purposes, which I also mentioned on a previous slide, about how they are in fact going to use the data that they collect from the users, because clearly the two go hand in hand, what data is collected and what is it going to be used for. So once the developer actually goes and enters that information, we then present it to them clearly as to how it's going to appear to users in the App Store. Developers will clearly be able to update this information anytime. And later this year, developers will be required to fill out this information before they submit an update to an app. Now, clearly, collecting the data from developers is one large part, but once we have them in hand, how do we actually then design the labels so as to be intuitive and accessible to users? So, here are some examples of what the nutrition labels may look like based on the information entered by the developer. You will note that the app's privacy policy is also presented prominently on the page if we start on the left-hand side. As you can see, our plan is to group together the data types under the 3 buckets of data I have just talked through: data not linked to you, data linked to you, and data used to track you, so that users can easily see how their data is treated. You will note that data used to track you is always presented on top if there are multiple cards filled out by the developer and available to users, as we think that is key. You can see that we've also introduced some icons so as to make it as easy as possible for users to assess the data that is collected. In this example, the developer has selected for data linked to you health and fitness, location, contacts, identifiers, browsing history, diagnostics, financial information, user content, search history, usage data, and sensitive information. Sounds like a lot, it could perhaps be, but it's presented in an easily accessible manner for the user when allied with the icons that are available. The developer has also selected contact information, location information, and identifiers again for data used to track you. So the user will be able to see at a very quick inspection the type of data that will be collected if they download the app and the uses that will be made of it. We have also a drill-in page that discusses more about how the data types are being used. So in this example, the user has clicked into data used to track you. And they can see that it's being used for analytics, advertising, or app functionality. And we have links to definitions, examples, and other helpful resources in case users want to learn more. Next, we wanted to make sure that users had even more control over information that an app may collect. So starting next year, and I think this has already received a lot of public attention and discussion, developers will now need to receive the user's permission through an opt-in prompt to track them across companies. This permission has a one-to-one relationship with the data used to track you card, which we just viewed. So if a user sees the label and doesn't want that information to be used to track them, they have an easy way to make a choice. Lastly, I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about the public communications that we have made about this feature and the response that we have seen. As I mentioned, we announced this feature at our annual developers conference in June. And we have followed that up earlier this month with additional details on developer.apple.com, which is one of our developer communication platforms. This page includes details about all the 32 data types that I referenced earlier, so you did not have to speed read it on that occasion, the purposes for why data may be used, and information about tracking to help developers better understand what they need to do to engage with users in this way. The response so far after announcement at our Worldwide Developers Conference has been very positive. with customers expressing hope that this will become an industry standard, and developers already thinking about how the SDKs that they put in their apps might impact their label. And this is exactly the kind of feedback that we were hoping to see. So with that, thank you again for the opportunity today to talk through our thinking on nutrition labels. And I certainly look forward to interest to how it was received in the months ahead. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Thank you, Gary, for this most interesting presentation. And I'm glad that you agreed to take questions afterwards because, dear members of the audience, Gary agreed that you can contact him via the platform if you have additional questions on the features he just described in his presentation. So please feel free to reach out. Our platform will stay active for a few weeks to come. So make the most of it and feel free to reach out. Thank you again, Gary, for taking the time and guiding us through the new initiative, basically. And I'm hoping that we'll see further changes such as these in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.